Everybody's all fluster with Joe Biden and his, D for dementia speech that he gave the other day. But nobody is still talking about the gross overspending that America is doing. So you have to understand that all of this, that the mask is off, right? The government knows that economically the country will collapse. And in that scenario, millions of people will die. America will go through, civil wars, and there will be skirmishes for power, right? Because in the vacuum that is created during a governmental collapse, people will want to seize power. And so you have people like Joe Biden, you've got people like Donald Trump and many other groups that are just vying for power. Basically, it's just two wolves fighting over who's going to eat you. And this is what is going on in America. But the overwhelming problem in America is entitlement spending. It's social programs that need to be cut, and nobody wants to cut them. Everybody keeps wanting to kick the can down the road, but we're already at the end of the road. And so the only thing the government can do is go the route of authoritarianism, because they realize they're not able to cut spending. And a perfect example is Argentina. I'll link an article down below from Zero Hedge. And in that article, it talks about how even though Argentina is facing 70% inflation and the government had to cut spending, so they cut all the social programs, and now they have 60% or damn near unemployment. And of course, with 60% unemployment and the government removing all subsidies, because most of these people lived off of welfare, the people are taking to the streets. And in a democracy, the only thing that will happen is the people will just vote for somebody who will give them what they want. And this is the overwhelming reason why the founding fathers did not want a democracy and why they instituted a constitutional republic where you had to have skin in the game to be able to vote. That's why voting was very limited. And of course, now voting is my right. And as a result, people just vote for whoever's going to give them free stuff. And this is the overwhelming problem of what we have going on, not just in America, but in many countries that are living off of debt. And of course, you can look at, of course, social media, people are talking about what's going on, that it's going to create a red wave. And I really don't see it. The states that are red may stay red. The states that are blue are going to be blue. The states that are purple will eventually be blue. And that's just the route, especially as the boomer generation, which is the largest generation to date, and we have, Gen X, the next one. But once many of these people retire and they live off of government subsidies, they then become socialists because they start to benefit from the state. When you're young, like you're still a young person, like I'm 42, right? You don't get shit from the government. Especially if you're young enough and you don't have kids, right? And maybe you haven't bought a house, you have no tax deductions. So everything, all the weight of all the government spending is upon you. And you see it every day if you draw a check. If you don't have a business where you can write some stuff off, you see it every week or every 2 weeks whenever you get paid. But once you become retired and then now you're starting to benefit from all the government, right? They give you all the welfare. They give you your Social Security. They give you all your Medicare and Medicaid, etc. Like all these little government programs start to kick in, and then you're like, hey, this isn't so bad, right? Or you get the idea, well, I've paid for this. I paid into this, so now it's my time, to partake. And the reality is that most of these people contribute next to nothing. Over 63% of all people in the country are not federal taxpayers. They pay zero into the system. And if you live in a state where you don't have a state tax, you're not paying anything. You're just a sponge. You're just a parasite on the state. And of course, that's why most of these people vote blue, because these are the people that are giving them the free stuff. So you can look at the government spending and you can see the trillions of dollars. In 2022, America spent 9.32 trillion on public welfare, and it breaks down the numbers where you can look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other welfare spending, government pensions, defense, etc. You can look at the breakdown, and overwhelmingly the vast majority of what the government spends, it spends on welfare. Yes, people will look at the billions that their billions that they're spending in Ukraine. Overwhelmingly, most of that is old tech. The government is sending old technology and maybe some new technology, and they're sending aid packages. It's not in the form of just blanket checks. What they're sending them technology, and they're allowing the companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon to value the old tech as if it was new, and then they're allowing them to write it off. That's basically what they're doing, right? And so the government is not sending all this money. Now, of course, with the highest inflation that America has experienced since the 1970s, you would think that the people are calling for austerity. Stop printing money. Stop creating more debt. No. Joe Biden canceled nearly $20,000 in student loan debt relief. And of course, all the dipshits on Twitter are like, you promised to cancel the law. It's not enough. This is disrespectful. We should cancel all student debt. You got these idiots on Twitter talking about how, the government needs to send out 2K checks a month to stimulate the economy. And it's like, can you imagine what the hell that would do to the inflation? But this is where we are. And it goes back to a very fundamental principle in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, where it says, a servant pampered from his youth will bring grief in the end. And this is where we are. We are at the end of a pampered generation of people who have lived off of a credit card for generations. I shouldn't say for generations, but I should say for decades. And as a result, they're so accommodated. They're so used to this lifestyle of having almost all this stuff for free. Healthcare is a right. Housing is a right. Education is a right. Childcare is a right. I need free jabs. I need free tests. I need free, Medicaid, Medicare, etc. Right? Government has to pay, all these pension plans from all these city hospitals. And this is where we are. You have people that have been living off of a credit card for so long, and just like in Argentina, it's all going to come to an end. So what's the government supposed to do in that scenario? What do you think would happen if tomorrow Joe Biden announced we're cutting a lot of the federal spending? Look what happened when the federal government said we're not going to get involved anymore in abortion. Look at what the people did. Look at what the people did with just the federal government saying we're not going to get involved in abortion. Now that meant that the spending burden was upon the state. If the state wanted to have abortion, the state had to fund it. It was no longer going to be funded by the federal government, and the people lost their minds.
Tuning Row is not perverted. It's all about controlling women. People, stand up, rise up.
As a woman, it's my constitutional right to choose what I do with my body. And it just seems ridiculous that now that's being turned into something that I can't choose to do. If they can restrict us when it comes to this, they can restrict us with so many more things.
That's what really angers me the most is I had reproductive choice my entire reproductive life. I was 13 when Roe passed, and I refuse to hand down any less to the generations behind me. I feel I have a duty and an obligation to fight to keep them having the same choices I did.
What would happen if it was Medicare or Medicaid? We got to cut spending. You know how many of these dipshits that come into the hospital that I take care of as a nurse that just abuse the system? Some of these people come into the hospital 300 pounds, 350, 400. They're basically bedbound. They come in, you got to give me surgery. One of the hospitals where I worked at, where they do bariatrics, right? You get these overweight 300-pound women, overwhelmingly it's women, that come into the hospital and like, I need bariatric surgery, right? You got to shrink the size of my stomach to force me to lose weight. Do you know who pays for that? Not them, nor the treatment, and it rarely works. But since it's funded by the government, there was a patient that came in that was basically bedbound. There was a woman who was like over 70 years old. She was like 70 something years old. And they're doing bariatric surgery on this woman. She couldn't even walk. She was so morbidly obese that her joints and her legs were basically ruined. She could barely stand. And I'm like, how is this woman going to lose weight at this age? But it's funded by the government. So who cares? The doctor's like, I might as well do it. And this is where we're at. I see the same thing with the alcoholics, these diabetics that come into the hospital. They're non-compliant. You get patients on dialysis, non-compliant. People with heart failure, they just do what they want. Why? And it's because of what I said before. Whenever you make anything free, you make demand infinite. And so, since many of these people know that they're going to come into the hospital and they're not going to pay a red cent, they're just a revolving door. They're just a revolving door. And it keeps people like me and doctors and the hospitals like, hey, we're making money. But we're making money at the expense of the country, to the tune of $3 trillion annually that America spends on healthcare. $3 trillion just in healthcare alone. America only pulls in like $4 trillion in taxes, the whole country. Meaning we spend almost as much on healthcare, just healthcare, as the amount of taxes that come into the country. And I think that $4 trillion was last year during a stimulus year. So during the stimulus year. So that doesn't even count. But this is where we are. So what does the government do? Right? You got to go full authoritarianism. This is why the government was pushing for passports, for central bank digital currency. They have to be able to control the people. You have to institute central bank digital currency. You got to institute mass control, because the result is when it all collapses, it's just going to be the French Revolution all over again, and millions of people will die. Just in America, not talking about all these other countries that are going to collapse. And you already see it. A lot of these countries, because of when the global economic supply chain goes down that America is responsible for. America is responsible for keeping up the supply chain by making the seas safe. This was one of the things that America promised to do, that they would make sure that the seas would remain safe for trade. So what happens when America is not there to do that anymore? So America is able to do that by might. What happens when that isn't there anymore? Right? It's just like a substitute teacher, right? When the teacher's there, the kids kids will do good. As soon as the sub comes in, it's like a whole different group of people have taken over. This is what will happen in America. Look at what's happening just in New York with the amount of crime that's happening. We haven't even begun any sort of real scenario in which we're collapsing. But this is where we are. And I understand why the government is doing that. For people who are pro-government, they're like, yeah, we need more of this. For people who value freedom, these are very scary times, because overwhelmingly, these people will trade their freedom for a stimmy check. And I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching, and I'll check you next time.